Hellblade 2? Now that's how you make a cinematic video game.
I'm a child with an animal soul. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere.
Hi, and welcome to On the Games. We're two souls here to talk about games.
Yes.
My name is George O'Mara. This is my co-host, Mark O'Mara.
Hello.
For those of you who remember, like, Swordcast, he's sweaty again.
Yeah, I'm sweaty again.
Yeah, he's
I was
sweaty
thinking
again.
about that.
Yeah, we're getting back to the heat, eh? Courtesy of Phil Spencer and the team over at Ninja Theory. We played Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2. Wow.
What a game.
Let's not spoil it, but wow.
I did not expect it to be like the experience that we got, to be honest. For a little backstory with Hellblade, Hellblade is by Ninja Theory. It was released on May 21st, 2024, so like a couple weeks ago. And It is on basically the entire Microsoft ecosystem. You can get it on Xbox Series X, S, Windows, and GeForce Now.
GeForce Now?
I don't know.
Never heard of it.
Yeah,
GeForce Now.
it's on all those platforms, so go ahead and check it out. If you have Games Pass, it's also on Games Pass.
That's what we played it through.
Highly recommend to just play it through there. If you have it, like, why not? Yeah, so honestly, I didn't expect the game to be the way it was. Like, I remember the first game coming out in it was like 2017, 16, 17-ish. And I never really played that one, but I remember people saying it was really good. It got a lot of praise for just, the story it was telling, the performance capture and stuff like that. And then also the gameplay. People said the gameplay was like pretty good, But I never played that one. And then coming around to this one, a lot of the marketing stuff too, they kind of mentioned that, like, you can just jump into this one. And so you and I kind of decided to just do that. And, the game is... I think you put it like best when we were playing. Like, there's moments where it's kind of like playing through a Robert Eggers film. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of the vibe of that game, because it's like, it's Norse, it's very gritty, it's very like, you can like feel the mud on your boots, kind of like setting and everything.
That was on the back of the box.
Yeah, you can feel the mud on your boots.
Yeah. Psychosis, feel the mud.
But yeah, it's a very cinematically focused game. A lot of games are like that right now, but this one kind of did it in interesting little different ways than a lot of these games typically go. I think like the most obvious one is like the length of it. The game's only like 6 hours long.
I would say that's the biggest part about it, because a lot of video games nowadays, they, and I've gone on my little, I'm not gonna call them a tirade, I'm gonna call it a rant, but my little diatribe, if you will, on these open world games, and they're too long. And recently we've been getting like these really big open world games that are also really cinematic. So you get a lot of time where you're like watching just cutscenes, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. It's just that it clearly, like, the games industry is like kind of in an identity like crisis, like part of its youth, if you will. And it was really refreshing to play a game like this that was like, oh yeah, no, we're going for a very cinematic approach. We want it to be more film-like. And because of that, we know it's a video game. We're going to ask you to do inputs and all that and stuff. That's part of it. But it's 6 hours long. And, like, that's, like, a huge selling point, I think. Like, for me to be able to recommend something to someone, like, as the time goes up in terms of, like, how much it's going to take you to complete it, it becomes naturally harder and harder for me to recommend. Contrary to, like, what most people think, where they're like, oh, there's more game. I'm like, that's not necessarily the best thing all the time. Like,
yeah,
I'm of the argument that, like, you finish something and you would want to play it more, which this does too. Like, where I'm like, man, like a really great film. Okay, this is like a really great game that is very cinematic, and like when you're done with it, you're like, man, like, I definitely want to have that experience again at another time.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
There's a part of me that wanted to play it again, like right after, but I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I want to let it simmer and I want to think about it, but. Yeah, I think that's like the biggest part about it. Like, I think that's the biggest thing they got right. And then they spent all of that time over those 6 hours focusing on like all these little details, like the sound design, the performances, and then this is not to knock other games with great performances. There's some games that have fantastic performances. Okay, these are like astounding, quite frankly. Like, the Unreal Engine 5, like, full display on this game.
Yeah, this is a huge, like... Because, like, I feel like you hear about what these engines can do.
A character like Senua is comprised of many components, such as anatomy scans, facial scans and rigs, physical costume creation, hair and makeup creation. Most elements are created physically, so that it gives us a good blueprint and ground truth model that we can digitize later.
Much like film and TV, we're now creating real-life costumes that are scanned into the game. These are crafted with expert costume designers, using traditional materials and techniques accurate to the time period, to achieve a level of realism and detail that simply wouldn't be possible using purely digital techniques.
You don't really see engines like pushed super crazy in these kinds of ways. But like this one in particular with like the facial capture and just like the overall like fidelity of everything, the environmental design, all of that, it was literally like if you were like at these locations, like looking at all this, like all the rocks and all the mountainsides and this, and you're like, wow, like that's insane, dude. And it's like a thing now, like a lot of games, it's like, you know, there's a lot of moments in games now where it's really focused to like have you walk up onto like a horizon a certain way, so you get like a certain you just get like a certain like environmental like reveal kind of moment. There's a lot of moments like that in games nowadays, and it's like, dude, when this game did it, like literally it was kind of like breathtaking, dude. And I know that's like a thing a lot of people say, but like this one like actually did that, where, you know, there's one in particular where we're like in a cave and stuff, and then we came out, and then you kind of go up some rocks and you're looking over and you can see like a little stream down there, and it's like, it was just crazy, dude. It was like super beautiful, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of moments where my brain was actually like very pleasantly and fully tricked, where I'm like, wow, I'm watching real people right now.
Yeah.
And usually like games are the opposite, where it's like you got the uncanny valley, and then you've got like there's like moments of immersion like that, but then it gets kind of broken apart by some other sort of, you know, video gamey thing or all that. This game is like, doesn't really have any of that. Like they really thought about how they designed it, because for instance, like the choreography of like the fights and the battles and stuff, or like the battle system itself, like the actual fighting, it's very simple. You know, it's like you got a heavy attack, a light attack, and you've got like a little dodge, you move around a little bit, you know. Later on, they introduce like one other mechanic where you get like this like mirror where you can like stun enemies.
Yeah.
And that's like
slow time.
Yeah, and slow time. It's like a little charge mechanic, which it does add a little something. It works. But more than anything, like, it's really impressive because they got like that part of the game, like the fighting, to feel really engaging, considering how simple it was. And the choreography for the fights were like so brutal, like super well like choreographed. It felt like you're in the middle of a battle. Yeah. And it was some of the most like striking stuff that I saw, like all puns intended.
Yeah.
It was there's like, I think every single fight that we finished, like in between, like I was like, whether I was watching you play it or I was playing it myself, like I was really immersed. And then when we were done with that little sequence, it kind of goes right into the next little story part, whatever it is. I was always like, wow, like you guys really, like, it feels like real. It feels like actual like steel hitting. It feels like people like fighting and actually moving around. Like it was, I don't think I've really experienced that, because there's a lot of games that will, I mean, a lot of games have choreography to their fighting and all that, but there's, especially when you're going for realism and you're going for like that cinematic experience, the way that Ninja Theory was, there's a lot of games that are also doing that, but then and I don't want to call it jank, it's not, it's just, I think it comes across that way because it's still a video game.
Yeah.
And so if you take like a God of War, Like, there's so many moments where, like, you're fighting, you're like, whoa, this looks really cool, and then you push a button, and then he kind of snaps to the spot he's supposed to be, or
puts on his little ice skates
and
for a
he
second.
just slides across, and you know, or
he slides, and you see the camera moving to like frame something.
Yeah, like
properly.
there's like the hit stun that you kind of like on the animation in between hits to make it feel impactful.
It's like animations based, so it's like moving the models to get the things to hit and look right.
Yeah, but then like you feel like you're initiating animations, whereas like I felt like I was not so much controlling Senua as I did feel like I was like working with her to like make the experience happen. Yeah. And that's why like this is like just another reason why the game was like so immersive, and like it really hits the nail on the head. Like I think this is like the biggest, like one of the biggest like examples that we can give nowadays of, okay, like see what they did. Like everyone shouldn't be trying to make a cinematic game. Like first off and foremost, like let's remember these are video games. I'm not saying don't make a game that's cinematic, but now look at what they did. Like look at how they use the medium in order to make it still a video game, because there's little puzzles and there's mechanics and stuff like that.
They use them to tell more of the story.
But exactly, because that's the main point, is you being absorbed in the story and you seeing and living and going through that. And a lot of games, I just think they try that so hard, but it's like this. It's like this. When you're trying to do everything, you end up doing like nothing. Like Senua doesn't have like inventories.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't have a map. It doesn't have a quest log.
It doesn't need it.
It doesn't have all of these things that every single, like, tell me a game that you played apart from, like, obviously, like, Hellblade, but, like, what are the games that you play that don't have those things nowadays? Like, Senua didn't have any of that. It was like, okay, here's the controls. Okay, this is how you move the character. And then, like, it was all story. Like, that was it. Like, a lot of games, let's be really cinematic, but then they've got, like, you gotta manage your inventory.
I think there's this.
It starts to get muddied.
I think this game, for me at least, like it kind of, so like it raised certain ideas with this kind of approach to a game, this like cinematic approach, because so many games are doing that now, and they've been doing this for a long time. But like all of them are super long, and all of them are like, they're like somewhat monotonous in what you're doing. Okay, like the actions of what you're doing, and for a while for me, I'm like, okay, like why don't they like make it a little more like engaging? Like I think God of War is like a pretty good example of this. Like the gameplay is like what you're doing on the controller, and like all of the aspects of it. Like, you know, there's things they got right with that game, but like the gameplay, like for me, I don't want to go back to it once I played through it once.
No,
I don't want to play that. I don't want to be mashing the right bumper for another 60-hour experience. And so for me, like, initially when looking at these kinds of games and experiencing how stripped back all the gameplay has to be in order to make the cinematics so big, the initial like thing my brain would go to is like, well, you know, put more time into the gameplay and all of that. But then seeing this game, I kind of realized, I'm like, you know what, like if you're making a cinematic game and you have a moment where the game is like, there's a puzzle where you're stuck for a moment, that kind of breaks the cinematic feel. And this game kind of took a whole other approach, where instead of trying to make the game so engaging and so stimulating, they stripped it back so much where, like, much like in a movie, if you're watching a movie, like, a good director will kind of like guide your eyes properly throughout a scene and stuff like that. And like in this game, like, obviously you're inputting, and that creates like a new problem, because it's like, what if the player doesn't know where to go? It kind of ruins the cinematic. Like for that scene, it ruins that feel, right? This game went so simple that like you kind of always know where you're going, and you're kind of always on the right track, and it's like very simple, but it like works to the benefit of like these moments when they hit, you're like super immersed in it. Yeah. Okay, and then like that mixed with like the facial capture and stuff, like I can't stress how good the facial capture is in this game.
It's honestly kind of like
they've been showing
incredible.
Yeah, they've been showing off that like whole like Inhuman whatever, I think that's what it was called. Like that whole part of like making faces and, you know, rigging models and how specific it can get and whatever. They've been showing that stuff off like with Unreal Engine for a little while. and they even showed it off specifically for what they were doing with this game.
Yeah.
That still doesn't really do it justice.
No.
For like when you're in these moments and you see like Senua and like she's like stressed, but you could tell there's things going on in her head because you literally hear it, and like per all of the different voices in her head and stuff like that, you see like these. It's not just her eyes. It's not just her lips. It's not just her cheeks. It's like these. It's like these tiny little muscles like throughout your face that you see like, and like when you look at a normal face, like those are all moving, like in real life, you know. And so like those kinds of things, like it was kind of like, it's like scary how good that looks.
Yeah, and you bring up a really important point is, you know, in line with the facial capture, because that's part of the performance, the technology like really allowed the performance to come through on that.
Yeah.
Like shout out to everyone who performed for this game, like literally everyone. It was like there wasn't one character that I was like not enthralled by.
Small but powerful cast.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is also just these moments with like the audio design mixed with the performance capture that was just, I don't know, like I find it someone hard pressed to like not feel emotionally affected by it, because there's certain things that are really uncomfortable in that game. Like I did not expect the game to be as brutal as it actually was.
Yeah.
I went into it expecting it to be, I don't know what I was expecting, quite frankly. I just didn't think it was going to be as horrific as it actually is in a lot of regards. And there's like one moment in particular where, you know, because Senua, for those who don't know, you know, she's in the first game, you find out, you know, she's dealing with like psychosis as a result of a lot of the traumas that she goes through, like in that first game. And they do a great job at illustrating what this looks like. You know, there's even a featurette like that's in like the game where we watched where they have mental health experts and they have like doctors and neuroscientists, like, and even someone who does deal with psychosis, like explaining and helping Ninja Theory make this game true to the illness.
The things that Senua experiences in Hellblade are very similar to some of my own experiences. She lives in a reality that other people might find hard to understand. She sees significance in symbols, in meeting people, in all sorts of things that are going on around her. Senua is experiencing an altered state of reality which would be very hard to understand without having experienced it yourself or playing Hellblade.
They did a fantastic job, you know, and what that allows in terms of the storytelling are these moments where you're walking through environments, which, as we've talked about, are also equally like so beautiful and like so real. And when you go through some of them that are like really scary, or some of them where like there is tragedies that had occurred in like these little villages, and you're walking through them, she can hear like the spirits and like the voices and things that have occurred that in those areas, alongside like her own voices. And there's one part where I walk through, you know, this village, this home where they're, you know, I don't want to spoil it for anyone. I mean, I feel like everything in this game is like, experience it for yourself. But there's some stuff that went down in that home that was pretty horrific, and you can hear her hearing like almost like the echoes of what had occurred there. And I just stopped because I was like really curious, where I'm like, you know, how far did they go with this? And I just turned the camera around and just was looking at Senua's like face as she was reacting, and she was reacting like left and right, like to the audio of the voice that she was hearing, and she was wincing, and like you could see the anger mixed with like the sadness mixed with like the pain, and the performance kept going, and there's this, it didn't feel on the nose, it didn't feel disingenuous, it felt authentic. And like that for me was like for me it was like, it got me, where I was like, man, this is like, in a word, powerful storytelling. Like, it's powerful, you know. And when I see something like that, you know, it's not to, we never want to put down other people. It's like we've talked about this in our other cast, you know, back in the day. But, you know, I feel like Peter Jackson, you know, when he goes like, first off, any movie that gets made like is a miracle. Like those things are so difficult to make. Like I think that most any piece of art is like that.
Yeah.
And so there is like always credit where credit's due. And I think that there's tons of studios that have like done amazing jobs on these games. When it comes to like a cinematic game, when it comes to something that is striving to be a movie-like experience, quote unquote movie-like experience.
Filmic.
Yeah. Okay, cinematic, all of that. I'm like, I've always felt this consternation, this kind of like feeling like being pulled left and right, because I'm like, you're trying to make a game a movie. Like the medium's a video game, so it's a video game, you know? And they're like, yeah, I know, that's why there's like all these video game mechanics. And I'm like, well, I want to play the mechanics. Like, I do want story. I'm not saying I don't want story. I love story in games. Like, some of my favorite games, like, I'd say all my favorite games have, like, a lot of story to them. But, like, the difference between, like, hitting R1 on, like, God of War and getting all these cutscenes in between, and the systems feeling like they put the amount of time they did because they were spending so much extra time making all these cutscenes, which, again, performances are great. Story we got problems with, but that's another cast. Okay, and the difference between hitting R1 on a game like that versus like an Elden Ring, where there are no cutscenes really. You're only ever really focusing on hitting R1 and making sure. I'm making the argument, the illustration seem more simple than it is, but it's like they poured all that effort into like the game mechanics. And like Ninja Theory with like Hellblade, they're like, yeah, well, we want to make a cinematic game, and there is gameplay in it. And it serves to further immerse you in the story, and it doesn't feel like cheap. Like they really like found the line between like, oh, I'm playing a movie, you know, I'm just like, you know, doing certain little things to like kind of keep the cutscene going, so to speak. It feels like you're controlling her, you're working alongside with her, but it's also very cinematic. And I'm spoiled because I'm like, okay, now I have the game to point to. When people are like, oh, but the game's so cinematic. I'm like, yeah, well, a lot of these cinematic
there's
games I've got problems with.
Yeah, there's things you can take
like
from, like, the example that Hellblade is, you know, with this stuff. I just think, like, there's, like, conflictions with, like, okay, if you're trying to make a cinematic game, in order to immerse someone in the cinematics and have it feel filmic, you kind of need to make it less engaging on a mechanical sense. Mm-hmm. But then they try to make these games so long. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like really the big problem. Like, you know, you used God of War as an example. We'll use it again. Like, they decided to make that a one-shot. And that plays into that entire game. And, like, dude, if you look at the design of it, like, dude, the one-shot creeps its ugly little head everywhere in the design of that game. So yeah, God of War Ragnarok is a one-shot, which is basically when the camera follows the characters throughout like the entire story, but like without any cuts. So I think a good example of that is basically like the movie 1917 or Birdman. You know, they're both one shots where they never cut. You know, and there's a bunch of tricks they use to like, because there are cuts technically, and there's a bunch of tricks they use to hide them. But like when you're watching it, there's no cuts, and the camera just moves throughout the whole story in like one motion. And in God of War, you're playing through that whole like journey. So you're like walking every step across Mordor, and like, you know, if Atreus has to go like take a shit for a second, you have to like follow him because the camera has to follow like all of this stuff. And it's like, it ends up just padding out like the entire length of the game. Okay, for instance, like Hellblade,
not a one shot.
Let's go back to that one. Okay, not a one shot. You have interesting stuff happen plot-wise, and they're like, all right, we need to travel from here to this other realm or this other land or whatever. And it does this super cool, like, sweeping view. It goes into the sky, and then it kind of comes like down to another land, and it's this beautiful landscape, and it starts zooming in, and you're already there.
Yep.
Because if you're trying to be cinematic, like, and you're doing, like, this epic fantasy kind of journey or whatever, right? Like, honestly, like, God of War and this are both, like, fantasy. Yeah. Right?
Hey, I'm both Nordic.
Go look at, like, a Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
Okay, they don't show their like every step to Mordor. Okay, they find ways to like immerse you in the world and show you their journey while also not like taking like actually like 10 hours. And so the thing for me is I'm like, okay, like if Hellblade was 60 hours long, I'd be saying the same thing with this one as I've been saying with like God of War. Yeah. I'd probably have even more to say about this one, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd have a lot of problems with it. Yeah.
You get God of War and you take my problems that I have with it, in particular these new ones, okay? And you shorten that, and I'm like, okay, see, now I have a lot less problems because it's a more potent like experience, and the mechanics being simplified immersed me more, and it was justified by the length.
It's like you can feel every bit of resource and where it went.
Yeah.
And it's a very potent mixture of performance and technology.
Yeah.
Because the technology is not just there to like be like kind of like, oh, look at like it's not performative in the regard of like, oh, look at what your system can do. It's look at like what Senua's feeling.
Yeah.
Like look at what this character, like the agony is feeling. Like,
yeah, and I think
it's all very strong.
I think like specific, because for me, I'm like, I look at like these cinematic games and I'm like, dude, even like a Red Dead 2, like I have some issues with it, and it's not to negate what they worked on, what they did right, and how like impactful these games were and why they were, because they were very impactful for the whole industry and for like a lot of reason, in particular with performance capture. Mm-hmm. And I think that's great. I just think like those games, for as great as they are, there's conflictions in what they are and what they were supposed to be and what the approach was. Like the approach is to be cinematic and tell these stories or whatever. And I think like the end product, there's conflictions in the design.
Yeah.
And Hellblade, which is why we're talking about it, I think provides a good argument for potential solutions to those conflictions when you're trying to like approach a game and make it cinematic, such as the length of it. And like, okay, because there's like a ratio with these kinds of games where if you're trying to be super cinematic, like the simplicity of the game to like how long the game is like a huge factor, I've realized. And I think this game kind of goes to like a whole other extreme. Obviously, like God of War is like 60 hours. You look at Red Dead, that's like 60 to 80 hours. And it's like, they're super long. And, you know, I just think this game's like, it provides a lot of good arguments and a lot of good, like, things that they tried that do, like, mitigate these kinds of problems, you know?
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that's, like, the overall thing. Like, yeah. I'm trying to get at least, and, you know, we both are really, like, with this whole cinematic thing, is it's like, it's not that we're saying that these games aren't good or anything. It's just they're conflicted. I can feel it and I can see it, you know. But that's just me.
Nice wrap up. Yeah, I think to kind of close out, you know, I would say that, you know, if you're even remotely interested in anything we said, like, just go play it.
Yeah.
You know, if you have Games Pass, go play it. You don't have to play the first one. We didn't, and we loved this game. I'm definitely going to go and play the first one. I started it once. Yeah. I got like 30, 40 minutes into it, but, you know, not the game at the time for me. You know, I want to go back now, because now I'm really interested in the whole story, and I'm really interested in Senua as a character, the characters that return, all of those different things. I want to see how that played out before. But yeah, I struggle to find literally anything to complain about with this game. Like, yeah. I really don't. I think it's genuinely a masterpiece.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
and the fact that it's 6 hours, I have no trouble recommending it to most anyone, you know?
If you're purchasing the game, is $50, by the way. It's not the full like 70, which I think is reasonable for the length of it.
I think that is incredibly reasonable.
Yeah.
You know, you go and watch a 2-hour movie in the theaters, you spend like $20 a person.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking at something comparable. You get popcorn, you're over. don't get the popcorn. But yeah, it is. Wow, it is. I think anything else we could talk about the game would serve us to spoil it.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. The one thing I'll say is don't let your kid play it. You know, I've got kids of my own, and you know, I don't think any of them are at the age to play that, you know, and it's a very strong concept that they're working with.
Yep.
And there's a lot of imagery that and
everything.
It's
a very rough, strong story.
Yeah.
I think one thing I want to say for Hellblade, just last little tidbit to tip my hat to. They go over a lot of stuff like, you know, mental health, PTSD, trauma, all this stuff. And I really do want to tip my hat to the team because they have the world and the lore and they build these things off of it to be able to make commentary on these things, but it doesn't come across like preachy. Or like they're just trying to talk on these things because it's like a hot button topic and they're like, well, we got to make it. It doesn't feel like that. And there's certain things that have come out that do feel like that, like shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where it feels like they're just trying to talk on like mental health or whatever for no reason. But like this game actually does a really good job at building that into the world and all that.
Yeah, it's clear there's a lot of care and respect and research done. Yeah. And the game is an incredibly genuine piece of art. Like I think this is like one of those like
you gotta check it out.
Amongst everything else we've said, you take that, I'm like, that's video games as art.
Yep.
So yeah, go play it. You know,
go play it. It's a great time.
It's a great game. You know, just go check it out.
Yeah, you have a great time. Yeah, Games Pass. You have no reason not to.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite frankly.
We had a great time here, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.